So good afternoon, everybody. It is 12 o'clock, and this is the beginning of yet another installation from ADAMA. And we'd like to make sure that you go to their website and lock that in, as well as their Instagram Live. The website is ADAM, ATL, so adamatl.org. And then the IG account is at ADAMA_ATL. I am Leatrice Ellzy, and I'm so happy to be here with you today. I'm glad that Fahamu has let me come out and play with the ADAMA group, so thank you, Fahamu, and thank you, ADAMA. But I am most excited to interview the great Edward S. Spriggs. So hi, Ed, how are you?
Hey. I'm fine.
Good. So as many of you may have read in the promotion for this, Ed Spriggs, I am the current director of the Hammonds House Museum in Atlanta, Georgia, and Ed Spriggs is our founding executive director. And so I've had the pleasure of getting to know Ed over the years and, really just getting to know him. And so you all are really in for a great treat. So, Ed, let's go ahead and get started because we've got a lot of ground to cover. This is where I would, read your bio, but this entire afternoon, this entire hour is really about your bio. So let's go ahead and jump into it. So, Ed, your people were from Texas. That's where your people are from. And your parents migrated over to San Francisco. And so, first of all, let's talk about that migration process. When we think about all the down south people and how people migrated to the West Coast and up north, and of course to the East Coast, Harlem, Virginia, and other places. Why did your family decide to migrate to the West Coast and to San Francisco?
Well, we were following my father. My father, a itinerant type minister, was moving around the country looking for the church home that he desired. And he ended up basically in San Francisco where, the world was turning fast there because all the people from the Pacific Islands and all those places were moving into the West Coast for a better way of life. And we were part of that migration, but we were coming out of Delaware.
Oh, you were coming out of Delaware?
Yes, ma'am. We were coming out of Dover, Delaware, to be specific.
Okay. I was thinking Texas the whole time, but you migrated over there all the way across the country.
Yeah, my father was from Texas, but we didn't live in Texas that much.
Okay. Now, I don't know if you know this, Ed. You know that I'm from Delaware.
Yes, ma'am, I do.
Oh, okay. So, what was it like growing up in the Bay Area back during that time?
In the Bay Area, it was very dynamic because you had a conglomeration of different racial types from the Pacific islands and whatnot coming in there. We didn't just have Hawaiians. We had, Filipinos, and we had different groups that were associated with the Pacific that we think of now. But it was dynamic in that we coming out of Delaware, didn't know much about the rest of the world, naturally, because that was Delaware.
No, that was Dover, Delaware.
Yeah, the capital of Delaware. Yeah. So we were in a segregated school setting, and Booker T. Washington School was our school, and we went from the 1st to the 10th grade there, and then to Delaware State, which was the natural thing, and in some cases it worked very well. So it was like very strange at first because we had notions of what the West Coast was like based on the cowboys and all of that stuff, because we were that era, that age. But nonetheless, there was a meeting of different types of African Americans coming into Delaware at that time, and so we were just one of the many types. Fortunately, my father was a sort of successful minister, and he was sought after by several decent churches at the time. And we landed pretty well in Dover. And then he decided that he wants to further explore the continent. So, yeah. So my mother said, well, you go right ahead, and when you get there, you let us know. You know? That was Mom. She was like that, but she was sweet. And so we did Delaware I did from the first grade to, from kindergarten actually, to the 7th grade. In the 7th grade, we moved to join him in San Francisco in 1947. So, you know, that part of World War, that part of that part of our time, you know, sweating through the World War II business and all of that was very interesting. My mother worked as an inspector in the munitions place in Delaware, and so we made it all right as a family and surviving. I have a brother and a sister, both older than I, and a half brother and a half sister, both older than I. So those were my father's children before he married my mother. After which, sorry.
Oh, no, go on.
So after he married my mother, we all kind of lived in the same 4-room house on a dismal street in Dover called Queen Street. Anybody know where? I'm sorry about that, but Queen Street was dismal as far as I was concerned. The school was great because all the teachers were Black, and they were definitely in your corner trying to help you do the best you could with your mind. And they were talented people and dedicated people. So we had no qualms about, you know, saluting our teachers. We had Black principal, the school was Black. So we did everything that we could to celebrate what was Black in that school, including Friday afternoon short movies on jazz and the whole shebang that was going on during those days. So I grew up with the Friday afternoon sessions in the auditorium, listening to Duke Ellington or Count Basie or Earl Garner or someone of that stature, and got to know them pretty well through that, that exposure.
Yeah, and that was one of the questions I was going to ask you is, so was your foundation laid, you know, where was your foundation laid for Black art and culture? So basically it was laid at a very young age in Delaware before you even got to San Francisco.
Yeah, and you know, we had a very active father in the ministry, and so a lot of things did not get by us as such. Yeah. But we had opportunities that were limited only to Dover, Delaware. We didn't have much beyond that. You know, I mean, Delaware was a segregated state, and Dover was a segregated town. And our communities were definitely segregated. I mean, we had rock fights and that kind of stuff, but we were segregated from, you know, from the real world. So in that sense, we were kind of, you know, on guard against the world, so to speak, because it was already a struggle to maintain your dignity as a person, and to having the idea about wanting to be somebody and do something was a whole other thing. And, you know, my mother was big on, you know, our heroes, which is how I got into, quote, Black history, so to speak, because she constantly kept the books coming to me, as well as my brother and sister, but I took to them more than they did, because they were in the play era of their age, and I was trying to catch up with them type of thing. Yeah. But we had quite a library with Britannicas, and listened to a variety of ministers from around the state and whatnot. Unfortunately, my father had quite a reputation in that, so we were kind of looked after by people in the church. But growing up in Dover, offered no outlet for anything with the art. If you had wanted to be a band leader in Booker T school, and someone in your family had an instrument, then you had to come with that instrument to play in the band, even if it was yours or not. So, and that's what happened to me. My brother was wanted to do trumpet, and I wanted to do drum. And so, you know, they kept asking me to bring my brother's trumpet to school. And I said, I can't do that. It's not mine, blah, blah, blah. So they kept on pestering. Finally, I just said, okay, y'all got this. I ain't in it. So, but that's the way it was, you know.
Yeah.
In order for the school to get, you know, flesh out its band, it had to try to lean on the community. But, yeah.
So
but
then
I'm sorry?
No, I was going to say, so then your art outlet, your ability to actually be an art maker, an art creator, didn't come until later when you were in San Francisco. However, you already had the desire to do so.
Not only the desire, but I was doing the drawings and stuff on my mother's kitchen floor, on the papers on the floor. But nonetheless, we were always active in making things, always active in making things and using our imagination. So
then how old were you when you finally made the move? You said you were in 10th grade?
7th grade.
7th grade, okay.
7th grade, yeah. And struggling with, how should I call it? I had a childhood injury which left me, you know, limping, which I still have today. And so I had that battle to fight too, because it was something that people would pick at, kids would pick at and pick on me about. So those battles toughened me up a lot in terms of dealing with things in the world. Nonetheless, we were in Dover from my grammar school to the 7th grade, and then we went to San Francisco to join my father in a new church that he was founding. So at San Francisco, we were at a multicultural and multiracial setting of students in the junior high school I joined, and in the high school I later joined. Fortunately, the high school, although it wasn't that well known to us at the time, had a mural, a wall mural done by, how can I block this brother's name? A wall mural.
Not Charles, wasn't Charles White.
No, not Charles White, but by Orville Woodruff, but by
You just talked.
anyway, why I'm blocking on that, I don't know, but because this mural was a white plaster type of thing on the side of the football field, which was on the campus of the high school. And we passed it and we played in front of it and we did everything in front of it, but it was by a black man that we didn't even know about at the time as a student there, until I got out of the high school and I learned about this guy because he was active in the community. It became, you know, one of those icons that you live by type of incidents, because he had a reputation. He was widely known. He was very widely known in the Bay Area, and became even more widely known after his death. But he was one of the leading artists of San Francisco, along with Benjamin Bufano, a sculptor. So we dealt with a high school that really had a good art department, art setting, and we learned a lot. We didn't suffer any there, but we gained a lot because of our eagerness to do the work and to succeed in art. So from high school, we go to San Francisco State College.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, from high school, we go to California School of Fine Arts, which was, well, I did 2 years there as an art student, and then to San Francisco State College, where I transferred to become more conversant with the ways of the world, let's say.
So let me
Because
ask you this
I didn't really,
question
uh-huh.
before you go there. So the decision to be an artist, you know, when did that decision click? When you said, "This is what I want to do. This is what I want to do for a living," and why?
Yeah, well, that's a complicated question because, as you must know, if you're growing up in the '40s, there's no site for you to think about being an artist.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, if you're coming from lower middle class parents, then there's even less of a site for you to become an artist. Artists had no stature in our community. They weren't making arts per se that we could, you know, that could be shared with us. And so there were very few and far between. Fortunately, though, we did come to know one or two artists later on who kind of like minor heroes to me because they were artists. And they were my sister's age. And in fact, my sister married a friend of a lot of artists at the time, the Merchant Siemens. So I got to know a few artists who were grown men, and I was, you know, preteens and all that. And they were looking at my work and goo-gaing over it, you know. It was amazing to see people read what I was doing and understand what I was doing when nobody in my family ever did, was unfortunately, but they did support it.
And that's
My mother
good.
was, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. My mother recognized that that was where I was coming from early on, and she stayed with me on it, and I stayed with her on it. So we kind of had that bound. She was quite a person herself in terms of crafts and stuff. She could do all the things that any woman who had any kind of home economics could do. So she was talented in that respect. So she could cook, she could sew, she could mend, she could, you know, do all those things. And so I had plenty turn collars, if you know what a turn collar is. I worked because I had two older brothers, so naturally I had to get to their clothes. But we survived the war years like that. My oldest brother went off to war, went to Germany. My father never went to war, he refused. And my middle brother, he didn't come into war until the Korean War. So, and I never got there because I claimed 4F.
And that's because of your limp?
Yeah, not the limp, but the incident that created the limp.
Okay.
Yeah, which was a shattering thing in my life because it severed a sciatic nerve.
Okay.
It left me with a almost useless right leg. Almost useless, but I made it useful. So we went through that, those years, you know, as Black people trying to survive the war years.
Now, what was the environment that you were in at the time in terms of the Black community? Were Black people, I mean, I know that, you know, we've all known the stories about the Fillmore district and, you know, those areas in San Francisco during that time, which were basically facing the same things that Black people were facing in across the country. But what did it feel like living in those communities at that time for you and for your family?
Yeah, well, of course, there was a lot of music associated with the churches, and people were coming from Southwest United States to move to the West Coast for better economics, and so we had a variety of music influences, hardly any visual art influences. except for one or two that I mentioned. And that was Sergeant Johnson, whose name I couldn't remember for a minute, who had a sculpture on our high school campus. Noted, it's a noted, in the history books, a noted, very noted African-American artist, Sergeant Johnson. So that was my first art hero, Sergeant Johnson, to be conscious of. And I stuck with him as a hero for a number of years because he was a person who had a very interesting life. He went in and out of Mexico for a lot and did a lot of work that had Mexican influence. Of course, at that time, there was the whole Mexican movement with Diego Rivera and others, which African-American artists attached themselves to because there was no other influences that they would allow. You know, they wanted. The Mexicans were the closest coming to their way of life and their struggles. So that was a natural. We had we had recreational things that were going on in there. In fact, my mother was participant in the staffing of recreation centers, the local recreation center, and it became, she made a nice reputation for herself in there because she was a talented woman. She could do things. Yeah, she could do things. But the schools were very good in terms of the supplies and the progress you could make as an artist there. However, you would never see a Black artist or never see work by Black artists. That Sergeant Johnson stayed on our campus in high school for years. The whole time I was at George Washington High School, out on Gary Street in San Francisco, Gary and 32nd Street. Nobody ever mentioned Sergeant Johnson. So it was after we were in, actually at State, when we decided we were going to make a little fuss about Sergeant Johnson because some of his sculptures were at San Francisco Museum of Art, but they were hardly being shown. And we found a guy who was an artist who worked there, and he encouraged us to make a little fuss to get it shown, get the work shown. And we did that. And we did that as students at San Francisco State. In fact, we did stupid things that would never happen now, probably. We borrowed, we borrowed work from San Francisco, borrowed work from the collection at San Francisco Museum of Fine Art to show the students at San Francisco State what a Black artist could do, because you don't know what a Black artist is and what it could do. Are they any good? You had all these questions, and being raised mostly by other people because they weren't accepting that they were Black artists or people capable of being called artists. So we had that struggle going on, and that whole struggle thing turned me to an organization called the Negro Historical and Cultural Society, which was a Carter G. Woodson chapter in San Francisco. Beautiful people, wonderful people. They were like family, and they provided lots of opportunities for me to express myself in art, making posters, doing signs, and all that kind of thing. And I became very good at all of that graphic stuff, but not good enough to get a job with the man, right? But good enough to supply for people who were on that level of the market.
Now, would this be the period of time at San Francisco State that you feel like your activism really began?
Absolutely. My activism began, I think you might say before I got to State, but was accelerated after I got to State when we saw what the deal was. The students were getting cut out. The student funds were being diverted to other places and whatnot. So we went to battle, and we set up our little organization called the Negro Historical and Cultural Society. Negro because nobody would accept Black at that time. That was really and if you said Black, none of the doors would open for you. But So we had a little struggles doing that. And fortunately, this was a transitional period at San Francisco State because the Black students were beginning to take shape there and to become a recognizable number at State. And we were able to attract some very dynamic professors like Nathan Hare and Julia Hare, et cetera. We had opportunities to, to sit at their foot. We were with, come to me in a minute. I don't think about these things very often. So when you bring them up, it's like, whoa, wait a minute.
I know, hey, Ed, I feel that way about last week, so I understand.
Okay. But yeah, so we struggled through the whole San Francisco State thing with the Black students trying to assert themselves into the dynamics of the curriculum, and including running, we ran a queen for the campus queen. Now her name is slipping me, but she was, is it Shug, was Shug in
In Color Purple?
yeah.
Margaret Avery?
Yes, ma'am. That was one of our classmates.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know
Did
if
she
she
win?
would remember this. Huh?
Did she win?
She did not win, because it's a campus-wide voting thing.
Mm-hmm.
But, and, to have a Black person being presented as the queen was really a kind of crash. So the nerve of those folks that
Right.
they have people. But yeah, so we use it as an organizing tool and as a teaching tool to show that these folks don't think about us in any way positive. So we had to do this for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So we managed to do things like run her for queen. We set up a kiosk on the campus in which we posted all the stuff, activities that we were doing, so that the students would know, and things like that, little things. And actually, that activism grew with that organization and became what's now known as the Black Students Union, Black Student Association. Which
That was the first one out there in San Francisco?
It was more or less. I mean, I'm not sure anymore because there's so many people pulling at these histories that I don't really know anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But we knew at the time that we were doing something that was timely and that we needed to do, because our purpose was to unite the students under the guise of strengthening our intellectual and other abilities to survive in the world.
Right, right.
And San Francisco, though, was offered a lot, but that never gets mentioned that much. But we had that Negro Historical and Cultural Society that I mentioned. I mean, the people in that group, the older folk in that group, were friends of Paul Robeson. When Paul Robeson came to town, he stayed at their house, type of friend. There are several other names that I could mention that won't mean that much to people not involved in deep Black history, especially West Coast Black history. That would say, you'd raise your eyebrows and say, wow, really? Yeah. Sinclair Drake, for instance. The last person I saw before I left San Francisco was Sinclair Drake. I had to go and sit with him for an hour or so before leaving the Bay Area, because he was the man. Sinclair was the man. There's an intellectual community in San Francisco that I have not found anywhere else. Yeah,
so
believe me.
Let me ask you this, Ed. So this is the period of time that we're talking about, which is your years in college. So you so what years are we talking about here?
We're talking about a lot of years because I came and left, depending on my economic situation and what I was personally interested in doing.
Okay.
But we're talking about, we're talking a number of years that in which I had two daughters, two grown daughters now. Old as you, Beatrice. That's a joke.
As old as me?
I said as old as you.
I'm a young woman. Look, I'm a young woman.
That's what I said. That's a joke, Beatrice. But yeah, and they're quite, nice young ladies. They just haven't had clarity about what they want to do with their life. Really, they're surviving and doing things. They're survivors, but they haven't figured it all out yet. It takes a while. Sometimes it took me a while. That's why I was in and out of school.
Mm-hmm. It does indeed. I was going to say it does indeed.
Yeah.
So, so how did everything that was going on shape your art? How was your art influenced by what was happening around you, by your activities, your activism?
Well, it was shaped by lack of opportunity. And so we began to make our own opportunities. We created a Bay Area-wide exhibition, or expo, some would call it, of Black artists, which was the first time that had ever happened. I was one of the primary pegs in that. But, we were always trying to establish who we were and why we were. Because you always had to make room for the question.
Yeah.
So anyway, San Francisco had many things to offer that were growth producing for artists, but they were not on our agenda for Black folk. They were not on our agenda. We had most of the civil rights things were kicking off. Most of the athletes were doing whatever they were beginning to do. And so the world was awakening to the possibility of Black people, possibilities of Black people. And Black people themselves were awakening to their possibilities. Excuse me. So that's what was happening at the time. But the art world had very little to do with our development. Very little. Whatever we gained on our own. We figured out on our own. For instance, I mentioned that large exhibition. We had no exhibition spaces, but there was a new hotel that was opening. It's called the Jack Tar Hotel, Van Ness and Gary Street. So that's a historical landmark right there. But it created a way for us to do an exhibition like that. And how we did it, where we get the equipment and all that. The guys who were working the construction and all that, we got to talking to it and learned that there were things that they were throwing away that we could use. Yeah, so we created a team of people that would clean up these cement drenched 4x8 panels that held wall, pieces together. So, and we created panels for exhibitions and found a way to get some lights up in there in the Jack Tar basement or wherever it was. I can't even remember that now, but it worked. And it blew people's mind just to see the number of artists and the quality of the artwork that was in the Bay Area, which was the purpose of our doing the exhibit.
Yeah. Now, how many artists do you remember participated?
Oh, wow. How many? Whew.
Well, just a ballpark. I mean, because you said it was a large exposition. So did you have like 100 or more?
Well, we had in the neighborhood of 100. I can tell you that.
Okay.
Mostly from the Bay Area.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was really a Bay Area wide thing. In fact, the temporary name we used was called BACU, Bay Area Arts and Craftsmen United.
Okay.
BACU. So we were identifying with with people, with the artists there in the Bay Area.
Mm-hmm.
And all the ones in Oakland that you can, well, you don't know Oakland, but there are a lot of artists that became prominent in Oakland that participated in that. One of the oldest artists was from Georgia. In fact, it's been associated with Hammonds House since it opened, because we've known each other that long. And he came to our opening. And he's always supported what we did. He's deceased now, but his daughter has this collection, and they've been moving it around the country and whatnot.
And who's that?
That's a good question coming to mind.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. We'll come back to him.
Okay. And you know, Ed, because it's as I'm looking at time, it's 12:35, and I have kind of hung in here so that we could kind of talk about like really the origin of you know, what really shaped you, because it sounds like San Francisco in those early days and that time, you know, at San Francisco State really shaped you as a artist, as an activist. You know, well, you know, obviously your family shaped you as an artist, it sounds like, but really kind of, I wanted to stay here because there's so many artists that feel like they need to just jump in it and all of a sudden they're an artist, or jump in it, but it really is about how you develop as an individual, because all of that you know, informs who you become as an artist, who you become as a, you know, as an activist, as an advocate, you know, and all of that, you know. So how, because I definitely, we have so much ground to cover. So I wanted to move on, because what we also saw was that you were a founding member of Black Dialogues in 1964, which spanned the years of 65 to 72. And so what was Black Dialogues?
Black Dialogue was one of the first magazines that were circulated from a black college. Well, from a college. It wasn't a black college, and it wasn't a college publication either. But it wasn't the first. It was the first that was directing its attention to visual, to verbal arts, to writers, to poets, to dialogue, and to you know, any debatable issue that we wanted to put in there. It was ours, so we could do it, and that's what we did. So Black Dialogue became a kind of a focal point for discussions and new writings, new poets, stuff like that, where we had a national really people who were nationally known at that time joining us because of the effort that we were making. And
now,
so
this where you, oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I missed that. What was that?
No, I was going to ask a question, but go on. Let me let you finish your sentence, your thought.
Well, I probably finished it.
Well, I was going to say, is it during that time that you met people like Amiri Baraka during the Black Dialogues as a result of that?
Yeah, Amiri's name is big in my biography because when he was one of those visiting poets around the colleges and stuff, and so we had a chance to get him to come to San Francisco State, and the black students there, of course, received him, and we had the opportunity to, you know, meet him and party with him and talk about what he was trying to do over in Harlem, called the Black Arts Repertoire Theater School. So I had a chance to do that before the repertoire school opened, and happened to actually meet with Baraka on a boat, on a what do you call those boats? Sitting there at the Sausalito. Anyway, this opportunity came because the artist who was at that time part of the Black Arts movement early on with the Negro Ensemble and all those people down the Lower East Side, before they came bursting out of there, were absolutely on the road, on their way to, quote, discovery, right? So lots of the artists who were functioning in the Lower East Side during the mid-'60s migrated up to Harlem and migrated toward what Baraka was doing. And so, yeah, several theater groups that started.
So while as we're talking, Fahamu is scrolling some of the content from Black Dialogue so that people can see the publication. So so anyway, so basically, you meet Amiri Baraka. He comes to San Francisco. Was he kind of the catalyst to get you to New York? And the Black Arts Movement?
No, I was already headed to New York. When I met him, I told him, I said, you know, another couple of months I'll be in New York because it was near graduation, and my plan was to skip as soon as I got one piece of paper out of there. It was not only kind of boring, but it was hard to get anything done there. Blacks didn't own anything in San Francisco at that time. Right. About 2% of the population, if that. And subsequently, you know, they were not about leaping out of that little crabby hole that they were in for some reason. And I couldn't stand that. So I was about, you know, let's do something. We got some energy. Let's do this, right? So that's what Black Dialogue was about. It's we don't have a national publication. We don't have a way of voicing what we are about. So let's do it ourselves. This is what it was about. This is what the air was about for us. So that's how Dialogue with some other students who were, you know, energetic and interested in creating a linkage between West Coast, East Coast, Midwest, and all that, you know, language. So we knew all of the poets besides Baraka. You know, most of whom were not. I heard somebody just emerged a few days ago in the Atlanta area named Nikki Giovanni.
Yeah, I've heard of her before.
Yeah. All the ones that were around Hakeem Mahabuti out in Chicago. Yeah. So we attracted them and we published them. And at this point in time, there were no places to publish Black art or Black poetry. There was a Negro Digest, which was a quarterly, sort of a quarterly, and of course, Johnson Publications, whenever they would deign to do something. So to have a new magazine come out and, you know, with no money and no, you know, experience, flying by a shoestring was interesting, but it was also very difficult because nobody believed we could do this thing. And we all believed we could do it. So we went on about doing it. We got, our poetry volume was so heavy that the Journal of Black Poetry, which is one of the greater of the two magazines, run by Joe Gonzalez Dingani, who lives in Atlanta now. Yeah, he had this magazine that was smoking. It was an international poetry magazine. And at that time, if you had a national magazine, you were doing something, you know, but to have an international one. Yeah. And to have someone run it who had nerve to go for what he thought should be in it, you know, that was a whole nother thing.
You know, Ed, what strikes me about you, as well as your, you know, your colleagues at the time, but really about you, is that you have in your lifetime, you started things. You know, you decide that there is a void and you fill the void. And you have done that continuously throughout your life. So, you know, from starting, you know, the organization to like, you know, being a part of that in Black Dialogues and, you know, the second, I mean, and we'll get to your work in New York. I mean, and we can go all the way to the Hammonds House Museum. But throughout your life, you have always been a person that saw a void. We could talk about, you know, the Film Society, you know, all these things. You see a void and you fill it. And what do you think it is about you that makes you do that? Because everyone doesn't do that. Everyone doesn't step up. Everyone doesn't, you know, does not always solve a problem that they see. Some people wait for others to solve it, but you've always solved it. Who are you? What makes you do that?
Well, I started off by telling you about my father, itinerant preacher, very intelligent, but yet, you know, I mean, he had chances with some big churches like the Herman Baptist Church in Cleveland, Ohio. Well, anyway, he had opportunities to be an associate minister at several big churches, but he was kind of like that too. He like when he went to the West Coast, it was about starting a church.
Okay.
The way that he wanted that church to be. So I never recall having a conversation with him about starting anything, but I don't know that blood is there or something, but
yeah, and by example, same way your mother was encouraging, your father encouraged you in a different way. I mean, we do learn by example.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Because
yeah.
because I've wondered that about you. I want to go ahead and move us forward to New York. And, you know, one of your big accomplishments in New York was being the second director of the Studio Museum of Harlem. And so how did that come about? And do you want to like take a minute, get some water? Or you
Very good. Yeah, I need to do a throat clearing thing.
Okay, go ahead, yeah. And so also I want to just let everybody watching while you're doing that, that Fahamu is actually putting links, as Ed is speaking, Fahamu is putting the links for reference in the comment section. So please go ahead and, you know, copy those links so that you can go back and join them later. But thank you so much, Fahamu, for doing that. So how did the Studio Museum of Harlem come about?
Well, that's a very interesting one. Little is it known that I was very active in Harlem from '65 to the point of the Studio Museum with poetry. Yeah, organizing poetry readings at the Schomburg and what was then the Conte Cullen Library. Under men who had vision for that. Well, anyway, he also turned out to be on the board of the Studio Museums at that time. And what happened, the real truth to it is that they got off to a very terrible start with the Studio Museum. The people didn't actually understand what they were doing. They had advertised and talked up the fact that they were going to start a Black museum. And everybody was excited. When you say Black museum, you say, wow, what is that? Is that for Black artists or what? So the word was floating around so fast and so furiously that it got out of hand. And the people who were trying to initiate this didn't understand that they had opened Pandora's box or whatever Pandora has. They opened it. And unfortunately, they ran into trouble because they couldn't deliver. And they had no philosophy. They had no idea about where they was going with it, where it should go, any of that. So, and I know I'm talking against the history of it, but it was obvious that they didn't know what was going on. And they weren't keeping up with what was happening in the black art world. And there were things happening all over the world. Things were kicking in the 60s, late 60s. And, but they were about following what was happening on Madison Avenue, unfortunately. And that is not where the black art world is. So we had that issue to deal with, and what happened was that there was a terrible incident at the opening, the formal opening of the Studio Museum, and you don't see this written about anywhere nor talked about, but I'm gonna put it out there, maybe someone will scratch the surface a little more. This was one of those cocktail, you know, above the eyebrow events where, you know, hors d'oeuvres and cocktails were being served. The lanterns were lighting up the sky, which said that something big is happening, and it was on 125th and Fifth Avenue. And so if you follow those lights, you end up at the Studio Museum in Harlem. Unfortunately, I got in on a Hummer because Bearden, myself, and Ed Taylor, and Gene Faulkner, and several other activists were coming down from a meeting at the Schomburg. And so that's only a few blocks for us to walk, if you know New York.
Yeah, right.
So we were going on that. So Bearden and I were just chatting as we walked, you know, blah, blah, blah. And he was telling me how he had been trying to help these people do this thing. And and I listened, you know, of course, and found out that none of them really had a grounding in museums or anything, black institutions or anything. And they had been so wrong in telling people they're going to do a black museum that, you know, they're using the word black loosely, but people in Harlem don't use it loosely.
Right.
Yeah, there's a fighting words if you don't be careful and say it wrong, right? But so we had a hell of a time trying to get Studio Museum back on the people's good foot. And so they were trying to find somebody who could do this who could be the director, whatever. I don't know why they chose me, but I do know I had several friends that were operating on the board at that time. James Hinton was one of them. Charles Hobson was another. James, did I say James Hinton?
You did, James Hinton.
Okay, and and a few others. And I knew Betty Blayton Taylor and Ted Gunn and all the people who were around the early days of Studio Museum. But it had a reputation of being a white institution because people who were supporting it were basically white people from downtown.
Okay.
And that was a problem for them. They didn't know how to deal with that.
That's interesting. I like hearing history that we don't know anything about. Carry on, please.
Okay. Well, I don't know what you don't know, but there's a lot there. There were a lot of people involved from one side of the street to the other. So when this thing unfolded and became really a problem for the institution, they began looking around to how can they straighten this out? Who could do this? Blah, blah, blah. Well, they didn't know me from Adam. I hadn't run anything in Harlem per se, except poetry readings. And I guess, you know, between Jim and Charles Hobson and a few others, my name kept popping up. And I'm sure that the guy who was running the Contra Cola Library had a lot to do with it as well, because I was very close with him in organizing things. They always turned to me when they wanted to do something, just some poetry or whatever. But we had an opportunity to say to them that, look, it's not working the way you're trying to do it, because you start off on the wrong foot. You weren't honest with the people, number one. And that's going to take you a long way backwards. These people don't forget. All I've done play games with its reputation, or its, what it claims as its own. And that's one of the first things you learn when you get to Harlem. Don't mess with what's there already. You can build on it, but don't mess with it, So, yeah, and I'm not trying to give you any advice. I'm just saying that, okay? As a matter of fact.
Right.
So we had some heart-to-heart with among the guys who cared, and came up with the notion that, Jim Hinton had always been encouraging me to try to go for this studio museum thing, and I'm not a museum person. I'm not a lecturer or as such. So although I could talk about Black art in a drop of a hat, of Black art that was going on around the country, and that's what tipped the scale, because that's what somebody was looking for, someone who knew something about what was going on in the country. So they ended up hiring me to be the director. Now, here's a guy with no experience in museums. I had best museum experience I had was community museum stuff around the Metropolitan Museum and the Museum of Modern Art. But nothing on the scale that would take in something called a studio museum, which didn't really have an open agenda, but had the potential of being the biggest thing in that decade for museums. So here I come with no skills, no fundraising, no this, you name it, I didn't have it, but they had me. So the first thing I did was to try to clean up the reputation of the joint, so I went to all the people who I felt were sensible, and there were plenty who weren't, to talk to about, the potential of this thing and what I thought I could do there. So anyway, it got through, and I became the director and started programming it. And people used to say, why do you wear a dashiki all the time? I wear a dashiki because it's an identifier. It tells you exactly who I am. And if you don't want, to know who I am, then don't look at that dashiki. Look somewhere else. But because that dashiki was killing people. That dashiki was something that people couldn't handle. Interesting. No, they couldn't handle it. We would go to a meeting or something, some big shots of museum and stuff, and I come in with a dashiki on. Not only was it comfortable, but it made sense. So you guys get used to this. I'm gonna be wearing dashikis in my PR or whatever it is.
And identifying as a Black man that is running a Black institution, it makes sense.
Yeah, it made sense then, and it makes sense now, but it wasn't easy. We have some people with some ways that are pretty, what do you call it? That don't have a notion about anything other than what they were told in grammar school about, or something. And I'm an iconoclast kind of person, so I'm listen, we don't have to go that route. We can do this our way.
Right.
And if our way is this, then let's do that. Let's promote this. Let's push this. So, but to say where all that came from, I think it came out of my father and his father, because on both my mother and father's side, they're preachers. I'm talking about preachers, people who preached under the shade tree down in Texas. You know what I mean? So Yeah. And so they endured a lot to get to what they had. And they were intent on that. So that stayed with me a long time as a point of departure for who I am. You know, I could count 4 ministers on either side, and one of whom I'm named after, the founding minister of the oldest church associated with our family. You know, has my name, Edward S. Spriggs. But not, yeah. So, you know, so there was a relationship there that was indelible, that couldn't be separated. And I just said, well, okay, that's who you are, so work with it, you know. Why fight it? Work with it.
Right, absolutely. So how long were you at Studio Museum?
69 to 75.
And during that period of time, how, you know, what did the growth look like? What did the further institutionalization of the organization look like under your leadership?
You have to ask someone like Mickey Shepard if that's the question.
Okay, I'll call Mickey and ask her.
Yeah. Oh, Mickey. Yeah, call Mickey.
I talked to Mickey last week, as a matter of fact.
Huh?
I said I talked
What'd
to
you
Mickey
say?
I talked to Mickey just last week.
Oh, okay. Good, good. I hope she's fine.
She's well.
Oh, good. Yeah. So the museum, you know, got off to a rough start, but it actually settled down into where we figured out who we were and what we could do and what we couldn't do, and walked that path. Then, you know, began to make sense.
And then did the museum become more well received by, or I'm not going to say well received because it was already, people anticipated it, but from a organizational standpoint, how Black artists were curated, how they were learning, you know, more about even how they do what they do. Did that happen during your tenure there?
Of course, we were always promoting educational
Mm-hmm.
situations for the artists. We never forget that, to do that. But so we had print workshops, and we had lectures and educational programs, et cetera, et cetera. Some of the first at the Black museums. And so we had a chance to actually initiate stuff that had not been tried before.
Mm-hmm.
And we associated with people who you know, who have kind of an open mind about where things could go.
And so New York at that time, you know, kind of being the center of this Black arts movement that was moving forward and, you know, pulling people in from all over the country. And it seems like, you know, when I think back and just kind of looking at history and thinking about that time, when you all were really starting things, you know, museums were starting, you know, there were a lot of things that were starting in a broader sense than the past, because, you know, Black people, you know, really just had more agency at that time. And so when we think about your circle of friends, you know, you talked, I mean, in this conversation, you have talked about Bearden, you've talked about Hinton, you've talked about Amiri Baraka, you've talked about so many people in this, and there's so many more, Nikki Giovanni, you know, Mickey Shepard. But, you know, you all were like it was burgeoning. You talked about the Negro Ensemble Company. So there was like this burgeoning art scene that was really exploding at this time. And so how do you feel now when you look back at that moment and look back really, you know, kind of over a lifetime of starting things, or starting them with a particular group of people that were able and worthy of, you know, kind of taking these torches and moving them forward? And how do you feel about that moment? Like, how does it make you feel about your role and all that?
Yeah, I'm very proud of the fact that we were able to do what we did and stuck to it. I'm not so proud of the fact that we understood all that we needed to understand. We didn't fully understand the dynamics of museums. We didn't fully understand the power of museums in the community. We really didn't fully understand that our desire was such that you can say it was a Black desire, but it was our desire, and that we should fulfill that desire. That was our mission. You know, in a very vague sense, that was our mission. And we didn't need Baraka to spell it out for us. We didn't need Lorenzo Thomas to spell it out for us, or Larry Neal, or any of those folks, all of whom I had many conversations with. But there's a depth of feeling, a depth of need, and a depth of appreciation that we have for ourselves that is yet to really blossom, or be able to signify what could be in our world. You know? Because there's some missing elements, or out of place blocks. Like that financial one is out of place because our economics is out of place. It's been whacked. So consequently, our focus on getting things done with money has to go through channels that we are not really controlling.
That's right, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that we have to explain to them why there's value here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So,
and you know, and Ed, I really appreciate that, and I appreciate you being, you know, so honest about the pieces that were not in place. You know, that as we kind of continue, you know, we continue this legacy. We are, you know, kind of continue the trajectory, and we are still struggling against many of the things that you talked about. You know, even now, and just kind of wanting to figure out when do we get to a point where, because, you know, I'm a firm believer of Black people supporting Black institutions, but the reality is that Black spending power is not there at the same levels, and has not, you know, hasn't ever been. You know, so how does that happen, and how do we become less dependent on some of the funding sources that, you know, that are there? So I really do appreciate your just your clarity around that. So thank you for that. I want to, because it's 1 o'clock now, I want to, you know, kind of break and take some questions from some other people. But before we do that, I just want to kind of jump over to, you know, since we are talking about the African Diaspora Art Museum, as, you know, ADAMA is looking at it from a diasporic vision. You know, you actually led the contingency to FESTAC in 1977. And so we can briefly talk about FESTAC. I know, FESTAC is like an entire, we could do a whole another segment on FESTAC. You need to move around for a minute?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Thank you.
So while you do that, I'm going to ask people, if you guys have any questions, can you just go ahead and put your questions in the comment section. And, you know, we're going to take a little break, let Ed walk around for a little bit, and then we'll go ahead and ask some questions. So thank you, Faham. I was going to ask you if you could put a reference up for FESTAC in 1977. So let me just kind of provide an overview for FESTAC for people who are not familiar with FESTAC. So there have been 3 world festivals of Black arts and culture that have taken place. The first one was in Senegal, and this was started by Senghor, who was the president of Senegal. Senghor had come out of the Negritude movement in Paris, and when he became president, he was such a huge supporter of arts and culture, and Black arts and culture. in particular literature. So he started the first World Festival of Black Art and Culture, and it wasn't even called that at the time. I feel like it was like Black Culture and Arts. So the first one was in Dakar, Senegal, and then the second one was in Nigeria in 1977. And then the third one, because I said that there were three of them, the third edition of it happened back in, I want to say, I'm sorry, no, it was like in 2008, somewhere around 2008. And that one was in Dakar, Senegal, and it had been kind of restarted by Amadou Wade, who was the president of Senegal at the time. So, but Ed was in charge of the contingency that went to Nigeria in 1977. And so when we get him back, I do want him briefly to just kind of talk about that experience of taking people, artists from here over to Nigeria, and how they really interacted with, these artists during Festac. So it was, there are plenty of stories, but I really just wanted to make sure that we didn't get away without talking to him about that. And I see in the comments that Sue Ross has also mentioned that Ed was an early Black independent filmmaker. And so we wanted to, talk a little bit about that too, as far as the African Film Society. We did mention the African Film Society in San Francisco, but he also started the Atlanta African Film Society when he came to Atlanta. So there's so much here to talk about with Ed, and I really wanted to provide him with the opportunity just to storytell, because I think that that's so much richer than us jumping through and going through, so many questions, because there's plenty of questions. But, Ed Spriggs is one of those, he's a treasure, and he's a treasure trove of information. He has done so much for Black art and culture in this country. And so I really just wanted to give him that opportunity to talk about it. So I'm glad. Thank you, Jamila Kennedy. I think it's been a rich conversation, and that is, every conversation with Ed is a rich conversation. And yes, Sue, we could do an hour on every decade of Ed's life. So Fahamu, thank you for the vision of wanting to present Ed today. And also, I would like to take a moment to say that this is the conversation that was supposed to have taken place last week, last Sunday, and the person facilitating the conversation is our dear brother, Pelham McDaniels, who actually passed away on Sunday. And so that is why this has been rescheduled, and we will be doing something, a remembrance of Pelham later on today. But I appreciate having the opportunity to not only interview Ed this afternoon, but really just kind of take the time from Brother Pelham as well. So so I just wanted to go ahead and speak his name, because we want to just make sure that, we continue to invoke these names, so Pelham McDaniels and James Hinton and, Romare Beard, and so many of the people that we have talked about today. So I just want to thank everybody for hanging out with us today. And Fahamu, again, thank you very, very much for inviting me to do this. So we are just kind of waiting for Ed. And I haven't seen any questions come through, so please let me know if you all have any questions for Ed that we will, take a few moments to answer as well.
I'm back.
You're back?
Yeah.
Come on, people got plenty that they want to talk about with you.
Stay tuned.
Ed, people are saying that this has been a very rich conversation. Someone said that we could do an hour on every decade of your life. We might have to do that. We might have to just kind of do that on the side and just kind of keep that for the archive. We can gather again. We'll sit you down in front of the camera. We've got some footage of you at the Hammonds House already, but we may need to do that. So let's think about that and doing that. So let's quickly go to FestTech, and I've already kind of given people an overview of it, and just wanted to
Okay.
talk briefly about your involvement in it, and you know, just kind of how you got tapped to do that, because you seem to get tapped to do a lot, Ed. You're that guy. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I could hear you, but I was saying, well, but yeah, okay.
Yeah. So how did you get involved in FestTech, and what was that experience? How many artists did you take over?
Whew. About 500.
Okay, that's a lot of artists, Ed.
It's a lot of artists.
Mhm. That's a
And
lot to manage.
we leaned on a lot of agencies to get that done
Mhm.
because it was a political ball that we were bouncing all the time.
Mhm.
And we won't go into that, but we had to you know, call on the Black Caucus, on Andy Young, on the State Department.
And I heard a story that Andy Young had to like maneuver an airplane to get artists over to Nigeria. Is that true?
If you heard it from him, it's probably true.
So there was a lot of maneuvering to get 500 Black artists to Nigeria.
Yeah, in two shifts. First 12 days of the festival and the second half of the festival.
Okay.
And we had the country divided into like sections. We had the
Mhm.
West Coast and Midwest and all that.
Okay.
So we had organized to do this because the Nigerians had promised us carte blanche for 2,500 artists. That was the initial
Mhm.
thing. So what we did was to say, okay, if we can do 2,500 artists, how can we do it? So we divided the country into about 8 sections and developed a criteria more or less for the artists to deal with out of their own section, so there wouldn't be any, you know, power plays and all that stuff that could go on. Some of it worked, some of it didn't. There's some ugly stories, but that's true for everything.
Mhm.
Nothing works perfectly, especially if you're starting from scratch, with nothing.
Yes.
But we had some of the most powerful movers and shakers in the Black world at the time.
Mhm.
Involved with what we were doing on our NAS, which was a national organization that we established to run the thing.
And so, what was the impact, do you think, of all the artists from the United States that went over there?
What's the impact?
Yeah, the impact on the artists, because I'm sure there was great impact on the artists, but what was the impact of these American artists going to, you know, really join with Black artists and thinkers and what have you from all over the world?
Well, I can give you a couple of names that you can get some firsthand discussion with to get that impact, rather than have me, you know, manufacture a statement.
Okay. That's fair.
The people I would ask you to speak to for a moment would be Nelson Stevens. These are people who had time over there to interact with artists on a one-to-one basis, and who felt the festival at heart. So I would say Nelson Stevens, Valerie Maynard, a couple people are deceased now, but they were very much part of the spirit of the time. I was trying to think of some West Coast people like
Tina Dunkley is saying Marilyn Nance.
Marilyn Nance. She was a minor player.
Mm-hmm.
Marilyn Nance came into view as a one of about 20 photographers that we were attached to.
Oh, that's right. She captured the images, right?
She's not the only one, please.
Okay.
She's not the only one. I know it's all packaged for her at this moment, but it's not the truth.
Okay.
She's not the only one. You name it, the photographers that were around at that time in DC and in Philadelphia and in New York were plenty. They were accounted for in the number of people who were taking photographs for us and taking film as well. But it wasn't nobody as young as Marilyn Nance at that time. She got in because of some other shenanigans, and I'll let her to deal with that. I ain't, I'm just gonna say it like that. Because I think she's, as you know, as you go through things, there's always a lot of stuff that gets, ruffled up and comes out the hanger wrong. But she was there. Marilyn Nance, don't get me wrong, Marilyn Nance was definitely there. I can show you a picture of her and Farrakhan and a few other people as she was learning who they were. But we had people like, oh man. Yeah, I'll come back to it, but I was trying to name some names who I figured that you would be aware of.
Okay. Now, someone is asking, so a number of people, because Fahamu said we have about 10 minutes left, and so a number of people have asked about your legacy, but before we do that, there is a question from Laura Greer who wanted to know, who's saying that in the early days, there seemed to be a lot more relationships between and among Black artists of different disciplines. And it doesn't appear to be as much collaborative energy these days. So why do you think that was? Was it because everyone was just kind of coming up in this thing together at that time, and now people have the opportunity to kind of be siloed off? But what is your thought?
Well, that's a kind of deep question. And Laura, it's a very good person to have answer some of that question, because she was there at a crucial moment, as well as Stephanie Hewley and a little mentioned person who was the director of the National Black Arts Festival. But the question of that you raise, I think is worth a discussion, because not an answered question, but a discussion of what the elements were that were holding this thing together at the time. National Black Arts Festival, we have to conflate that into the FESTAC and all of that. But it occurred at a very specific time, and I think the people like you know the dynamics of those times and the players, because they're still around, and they're not hiding, but they are they should be celebrated for enduring the period, because it was not easy.
Amen.
Yeah, I know you would. But yeah, it was not easy, and there's no blueprint. we had no blueprint to advise us as to how to work with Africans. And we say that as if that's some kind of mysterious thing, but it's a different culture, and the expectations are different from people. And then when you're not a non-government entity dealing with a lot of government entities on the African continent, that's a whole nother ball game. Especially if you don't really have any power. We had, fortunately, some good people who were leading us, and that one person would have been Jeff Donaldson. Second person would have been Hoyt Fuller. Third person would have been somebody like, what's her name? Some West Coast lady I'm trying to think of. And you can't help me with that. But
I can't. You're right. I'm sitting here thinking how ill prepared I am to talk about West Coast giants, which is, I mean, there's some, but not, you know, historically. I just don't know all the history. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have to work on, Ed. Thank you. Something I need to work on. But we have about 5 minutes, Ed, and a question that has come up a few times was, what do you see as your legacy? And I'd like to close with that. And ask for Hammonds to get, you don't know what?
I said, I don't know what my legacy is going to be, but I know what I want it to be.
Okay. What would you like for your legacy to be?
Well, I like to follow the train of my father and mother, and think that I was a worker and that I work for the people. Period, not myself, the people. And I point that out because there's a lot of selfishness in the game. We know it. So I'm not trying to down anybody. I'm just saying the reality of it is there is a lot of selfishness in the game. The game, the game, the game. But we have to live. We have to live with that, and we have to figure out ways to get around that, you know, because it's going to be there. And thank goodness there are people who do have some wider view of what has been going on for the last 40 years in Black arts, then they just need to have an opportunity to speak on it, to put it out there, so that whatever thing you're talking about with legacy might be a necessary evil.
And in our last 2 minutes, Ed, what are you most proud of?
Most proud of? As an institution, but you would have to know the history of this, but the Studio Museum almost went under several times, people. And it's still here. So I'm proud of that survival instinct within Black America. From all the quarters that people stepped up. What I'm most proud of is the endurance of African American aesthetics. That certainly a museum and a movement has helped to promulgate and to provide avenues for expression. I'm very proud to have been a part of that for as long as I was, and for in every direction that I was involved. And I couldn't think of for myself of a better way to spend my days on earth. You know,
Yes, yes, yes.
like the brother said, I enjoyed the ride. Not only enjoyed the ride, I had a hell of a time on that ride. Yeah.
We are
You can't
grateful.
believe.
And we are grateful for you and grateful that you existed. Grateful for everything that was instilled in you from your parents and generations of your people in order for you to provide us with the gifts that you have provided us with. So I want to thank you from all of the people who are tuned in, because everyone's saying thank you. But also I'd like to thank you, to personally thank you as well, because you know, your leadership has really, you know, supported me in my own journey. So I'd like to say thank you to that for that. Thank you to you for that.
You're quite welcome. Thank you.
So I think, everyone, that will do it for us today. Bahamu, I'm going to turn it over to you for you to close this out. And everyone, please remember to check out the ADAMA website so that you can see other salons that will be coming up, and check them out on Instagram. So Instagram is ADAMA up. It's all the way at the top. So let me see. Let me go all the way back up. Okay, so Instagram, ADAMA_ATL. So hit them on Instagram, start following them, as well as the website is ADAMA or ADAM ATL, so adamatl.org. And the motto, which is very fitting, is everywhere we go, there we are. So thank you all so very much, and we wish you hope you have a happy Sunday, and we'll see you next week.